I'm Tammy host for Executive with a Cause. Today on the show, I welcome Hannah Andrevski, the founder and CEO of Roundabout Canberra, a charity that helps provide pre-loved baby and children items to families in need. Today, we're going to chat about the good, bad, and hard things about running a charity. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tammy. I really appreciate you having me today.
Well, I first found about Roundabout Canberra from a mutual acquaintance of ours, Mel. She was trying to ask for some advice about finding software for your organization, and that was the first time I heard about it. But then we ran into each other at a volunteering expo.
That's right.
Was a few months ago, I think. At this point,
yeah, that's right.
So tell us some more about Roundabout Canberra.
Yeah, so I started Roundabout back in 2018. So I was on maternity leave with a newborn and a toddler, and had wanted to be able to pass on my great pre-loved baby items to families in our community that needed things, and there just wasn't really any easy way to do that at that time. So I started hunting around and doing some Googling, and I came across some wonderful organisations in other parts of Australia that do what we now do, which is take donations of secondhand baby and children's items for newborns right through to size 16, so roughly 16-year-olds. And then we work with a network of about 90 social services and community organisations. So that's like public hospitals, women's refuges, migrant and refugee support services, some of the social workers that work in the schools, so a whole range of organisations that work with families in our community that are experiencing hardship. And basically, whenever those organisations are working with a family that needs things for their children, they come to us and we prepare exactly what each individual family needs. So it might be a box of clothes for some families, and right now, winter clothing, it's very cold in Canberra, in Australia at the moment. Winter clothing is in high demand, but it might also be everything you might need for a newborn child, so a cot, a pram, a car seat, clothing, linen and toys, and then some items for older siblings as well.
Could someone from the public come to you directly?
No. So we deliberately work with services or organisations. And for us, there's two reasons for that. One is because we're very focused on protecting the dignity of the families that we're supporting. And it can be embarrassing to ask for help, and we don't want to put people in that position. So we think if they're already working with a service and they can manage this through that relationship with that service, then that's nice. And if they're not already working with a service, we feel that if someone needs goods for their children, they probably do need some other form of support, and we're just not in a position to offer that. So if people do contact us directly, which they do, certainly, we have a list of a few different services that we put them in contact with depending on their circumstances.
Okay. I have a number of questions, but I want to go back to your origin story, because I find that there's a lot of people that have great ideas, or they see there's a need, but rarely do they start a charity, especially if you just had a newborn. Like, what were you thinking?
I don't know. I've always been quite a driven person, I guess, and I found, having my first baby was very hard. I'm sure a lot of people find their first baby a real challenge, but my second baby was much easier. And I just felt good about life, and I felt I had some energy and, wanted to use my brain while I was on maternity leave. So, I don't know. I still, when I reflect on it, I still can't quite believe that it got off the ground and is what it is today. But, it just did.
Well, walk us through how that happens. So, when you say you want to start a charity, what did you do?
Yeah, so I was in a mother's group at the time with my 6-month-old. So basically I'd found these other charities in other parts of Australia. I felt like there was a model that I could see that would work really well in Canberra and that didn't exist in Canberra at the time. So initially I sent some emails to a few services that I knew worked with women and babies mainly. So there are a couple of women's refuges in particular here, and some other services, just to ask them if they thought something like that might work here. So I didn't have any background in community services. I was a federal public servant here in Canberra. So this definitely, wasn't my area of expertise, but I've got common sense and, I solve problems. I do that quite well. And they all wrote back to say, yes, something like that would work really well. And one of the services in particular said that they actually had been thinking for some time that something like that could work really well in Canberra, and they would be very supportive of, providing guidance and advice and, helping it to get off the ground. So thankfully, there also were a couple of women in my mother's group at the time who were either had experience starting charities or were working in the not-for-profit sector. So I took a lot of advice from them, and I think that's another thing that I do well. I really do try and suck up as much information as I possibly can from people who know what they're talking about. So I think those ladies in my mother's group really helped at the time, and helped me, so I decided to do it basically, and I managed to pull together a group of women, wonderful women from around me, either through my mother's group or through my social network or my working life. And they helped to form the initial board that got the legal framework set up for Roundabout. And I think in those early days it really was just about taking that expert advice, looking for pro bono advice. So I, found an accountant and a lawyer who were happy to offer pro bono support to get that framework set up, to get the tax-deductible gift status sorted and, the company set up so that we could function legally and take tax-deductible gifts, which is an important part of running a charity in Australia, to be successful. So it all just kind of came from that.
So most was pro bono. Did you have any initial funding to start anything?
So I did a sort of a crowdfunding campaign to raise $5,000 right at the start to cover like the cost of setting up a company. And so I think I can't quite remember the details, but I think there were some costs that we had to lay out to set up that structure. But certainly the support we received was pro bono, which was great. And it was really nice that the community even supported us for that $5,000 because, we couldn't provide tax-deductible receipts or anything like that at that point. So that was wonderful. And the other amazing thing that happened was that, and this was just a luck thing, someone sent me a Facebook post for a sports club in Canberra who were looking to rent out a space free of charge to a charity, and we were able to make contact with them, and they actually held that space for us until we got our legal framework set up so that we could use that space. So it meant at the start I thought maybe I'd just run it from – I lived in a 3-bedroom apartment at the time. I thought maybe I could just run it from the storage cage of my apartment. So it was just extremely lucky that that space became available and that they kept it for us because it allowed us to have a premise to operate from.
And that's quite expensive.
Definitely.
Part of an organization is just having a location, right?
Definitely. Absolutely.
I could picture now your storage shed being full of things like prams or strollers, bassinets, playpens. Like I can't imagine that actually working very well.
No, it never would have worked. We very quickly filled the space that we were given in the sports club. I always say it's a bit like a handbag. No matter the size of your handbag, you'll fill it. And it's a bit like that with our storage space because since then we've moved into a larger space and it's full too. So I think no matter what we have, we'll manage to fill it.
So let's talk about donations then. Where do you get your donations from?
Yeah, of goods. So members of the public, so the Canberra community, just come and we run a number of sessions a week where we're open. We've got we have a team of incredible volunteers, about 250 volunteers who keep Roundabout really churning. So and while we're running volunteer sessions, we have members of the public come and drop off their donations to us.
Okay.
So we take everything that is considered essential for a newborn, and then for the older kids, it's really clothing, linen, toys, and school-related items, as well as toiletries that we take and give out.
Okay. And then when the inventory or the donation comes into the organization, what do you do from there?
Yeah. So there's our volunteers spend most of their time sorting, checking, washing, repairing all of the donations that come in. So we're very focused on, and this comes back to that dignity piece, we're very focused on making sure that the goods we pass on are like a gift for the families we're giving them to. So we've got high standards. We won't pass on anything that's broken or damaged or, missing parts. If we can repair it or, get it back to its original state, we'll do that. So for items that have mandatory safety standards, so that's like cots, prams and car seats and things like that, we, if they come in and they're damaged, we'll repair them if we can to bring them up to scratch with the mandatory safety standards. If they're not considered safe and they don't pass our safety checks, we can't pass them on. But yeah, our volunteers work really hard to make sure that everything's in great condition. And there's a whole process that goes into, carefully checking each item of clothing to make sure that there's no stains or, tears or missing buttons and things like that. And then for the things that we can't take, we try and be very creative with what we do with those, because we're also, although we're very focused on supporting the families, we're also very focused on reducing the impact on our environment and, the amount of goods that end up in landfill. So we partner with some other organisations to try and keep that to a minimal. So we, have wildlife organisations that we support and provide them with bedding that's, slightly damaged that they can use for rescued wildlife. There's a great organisation in Canberra called Kamari who have a program for people with disabilities where they turn old clothing or cloth items into rags. So that's where we send the clothing that's in really poor condition.
Okay.
And then a series of other organisations. So we just, have some really good partnerships that mean we can keep the amount of stuff that goes in the bin to a minimal.
That's great to hear, and especially since there are other charities with other missions that can use these things.
Yeah,
it's great to see that collaboration. You were talking about volunteers earlier, and I said, wow, because you're such a young organization with that many volunteers. That's pretty significant. What kind of processes and policies did you have to get in place quite quickly? Because this is not like a simple check. It's actually like this is a child's safety that you have to think about. What did you do to get all those things in place?
Yeah, So in terms of the goods that we're passing on, so we were very fortunate in that we were able to learn and take advice and take information from these other organisations that I mentioned that do what we do in other parts of Australia. So, and I think, I've hinted at this already, but I think it's really a theme from my experience, like taking advice from people who know what they're talking about. And so there are organisations in really all of the capital cities in Australia that were all already established and doing this. And they're we talk about the sister orgs. So it's, they're all run by incredible women. And they've all been, there's a few in particular, but they've all been extremely helpful in sharing their policies and procedures and systems and, lessons around what has and hasn't worked. And that really helped us to refine our model. And obviously we've, refined things over time in our own way as well. But that helped a lot in terms of, developing safety checks for the items with mandatory safety standards. We've also worked locally with KidSafe, which is a car seat installation and checking and safety charity that operates here in Canberra and other parts of Australia, and SIDS as well in terms of safe sleeping practices. So we have tried to engage with all of the relevant organisations that know what they're talking about. But it's so we're constantly refining those things further, and we have two wonderful volunteer coordinators who are paid staff who support our volunteers to make sure that they're up to date with, the information they need to know to do their bit in our organisation.
I can't help but think that what you've just done is expressed a very good best practice. I don't see small charities growing so quickly. And to see you grow so quickly with just a volunteer. So let's not even talk about the finances yet. But from the volunteer point of view and the impact that you're already making, to be able to take something that's already been done and to implement it so quickly, there's obviously no way you could have grown that quickly if you didn't have that information from these other
Definitely not.
organizations.
No, definitely not. And it also was so it's helped me in terms of my approach and how I, the support that I offer to people who approach me about, taking my advice, because I just think they helped me so much in those early days. And still, even today, I went to Queensland a couple of months ago to visit a charity, Baby Give Back, who operate in Queensland and do what we do. And yeah, so I want to do the same for anyone that, wants my advice. So although, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert charity CEO, but I think it's really nice to share your knowledge and experiences and the lessons around what doesn't work as well, so that people don't waste their time. So yeah, it's important.
So initially I said that I found out about your organization because of software. Obviously, you have a ton of inventory. How do you keep track of it now?
Yeah, so it's actually a very topical question. So we started off using a sort of order management system that was given to us by one of the organisations that does what we do from Sydney, Dandelion Support Network. So they had an IT board member, a very skilled IT board member who had built a purpose-built system for them, which was incredible. But we actually won a grant last year through the ACT government here in Canberra to build a Salesforce CRM. And that has been an absolute life changer for us. So we have we manage our volunteers, our fundraising, and our orders and inventory through Salesforce. And that was built by a fabulous consulting company in Melbourne called Blaze Your Trail, who specifically work with charities. And they also train. They have volunteers who do a lot of work with them to help them upskill and to find employment themselves in the Salesforce space once they've done their volunteering time. So it's a really wonderful organisation. But that has been an absolute life changer for us. And I spent this morning trying to learn some of the stuff in the fundraising space on Salesforce. So it's certainly challenged me. But it's to have everything, all of our data in the one place with the one system is incredible. So
I don't have any clients or anyone I've been working with that have used it for inventory. So that's a really interesting use case in the charity sector anyways, right? It's a very powerful CRM for fundraising.
Yes.
And if you're a member organization, there's some benefits out of that as well. But I haven't yet seen anyone also do it for inventory. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's been fantastic for inventory and our order management as well. But yeah, it's great.
And the reporting capability must be amazing.
It is. It's fantastic. And even, to be able to report back on grants, we can easily pull our information out of there and talk about the impact. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, good to hear. So because of that, I can't help but dive into the tech a little bit further. When you have an organization that has identified a family that needs help, how would they interact with you or the system to provide that request?
Yeah, so everything's done through web forms that go in as leads into Salesforce. So we have web forms that are completed. So when an organisation's registering with us for the first time, and then when they're completing a request for an order for a family, they fill out an online form. So it's very straightforward. It sort of prompts them, to fill out sort of the details about the family and the items that they're seeking for the family. And that all comes through to us. And we then have a social services manager who looks after the receipt of those requests. She engages with the services, packs the orders, and basically then makes contact with the services who then come and pick the orders up from us and they take it to the family. So again, that's about us not having that direct contact with the families. It's the service or the organisation that comes to pick the order up from us and to take it to the family.
And you don't need a bunch of drivers too.
No, exactly. That's
that makes
exactly
it
right.
really nice.
Yeah.
And then as far as I would expect some sort of warehouse of some sort. It's one thing to have it all in the system. Is there a way to physically track the items?
So we track everything that goes out. in terms of what we track as inventory in the system, we focus on the big sort of safety-related items, and that's so that we can allocate, so a cot, a pram, a car seat, those types of things, they're tracked in our system. And basically that's so that we can allocate them to particular orders. So we'll know exactly which family received the, dark brown, baby jogger pram, and it has a barcode allocated to us, and that just means we can go back and look at how we've helped a family before and how their needs might be changing if they come back to us with an additional request or something like that, or if God forbid something goes wrong, we can go back and have a look at that, which hasn't happened yet, thankfully. But so we track some items, but not everything.
Yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of
the volume of clothing and toys and linen. So but we know exactly what we've given out. So we're tracking that. So we can tell you how many clothing packs we've given out in a year and how many toy packs and things like that.
The data must be amazing.
It is.
How do you reckon you can use that data for other things?
Yeah, so the data is very powerful, and I think probably particularly in the grant space, which is obviously so important for charities. So I think for us to be able to, reflect on what our, we can sort of project what our needs will be into the future by looking at what we've, given out and where we're at based on, what's happened in the past. So we often, talk about the number of children helped, the number of families helped. We can track all of that through our Salesforce system. Then also, as I said, the number of particular items we've given out. We can track the value of those, the secondhand goods, which is all data that's built into the system. We've got a lot of information in there about the circumstances of the family. So we can talk generally about the fact that half of the families we help are single mums, 1 in 5 are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. So that sort of data all comes from the data that's being captured in the system. So it's really powerful in terms of applying for grants, acquitting grants, reporting back to people who funded us. So it's really important.
I can't help but think that other charities could also benefit from that information. Do you consider making any of that public?
we're definitely, possibly. It's not something I've actually thought about in the past. We do talk about we talk publicly about some of the stats. But yeah, possibly. And I'd also be really happy if people wanted to reach out to me to ask some questions or get some information about our experience. I'd be really happy to share that.
Operationally, as a small charity, with how many staff do you have right now?
So we've got 5 paid staff, but we only add up to just over 2 full-time equivalent employees.
Incredible.
And 250 volunteers.
So that already, I think the listeners need to understand that you have a best practice right here. This organization that you're running is best practice for a small charity, because I've seen so many different charities with the ones I work with, the ones I've been on boards with, and even the people I talk to in this room. And to have only 2 FTE, paid FTE, all those volunteers, and using Salesforce effectively, that's just brilliant. It just shows what you can do through automation and good processes in the background.
And good advice from people. Listen to the advice.
Well, let's talk about that, because I could see you have an amazing board. Like the skill set across those individual women, all women,
definitely,
are just ideal when you think about the board skill set that you need. So how did you attract these amazing women into the board roles?
Yeah. So our board has definitely grown and matured over the 4.5 years that we've been running. So as I said before, at the start, the board was really sort of the operations committee. They were the people who were, and there were some very skilled people at the same time, but we were a startup. We were really a startup. Everyone got their hands dirty. Like each of the board members had, a responsibility to do with something operational. But over time, we've managed to lift the board and we've managed to, some of the original members have naturally sort of gone off to do other things. So it's meant we had opportunities to sort of look at where our gaps were and to fill those. So we now have a great group of women, as you said. And we've got someone who's got a huge amount of experience in the volunteering space. place. We have a lawyer. We have someone with a really strong finance background, and we have a couple of people who are very experienced in the not-for-profit sector. So we have never advertised. It's always been through relationships or word of mouth or just one of us interacting with. So I was on the board until this year when I became the CEO and I took myself off the board. But yeah, it's always been through just conversations that we've had and interactions we've had. We've never done a formal advertised position, but it has meant that we've been able to be selective, fill the gaps that we felt we had, and find people who I think what we all share is a very strong alignment and passion for the mission of what Roundabout does. But then we've got, a lot of, they're all quite different in terms of personality, so all offer different perspectives, different skill sets, but it's meant that we're now in a place where our board is strategic, very high functioning, like very skilled, and it's great. As you said, we're very lucky.
So you've just taken yourself off the board, but you are the founder. Do you ever get nervous that one day this organization no longer wants you or needs you?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually because we had another CEO last year who prior to last year, I had actually gotten to the point where I was very burnt out. I'd been, managing my job, managing Roundabout outside of work, putting a lot of time into it with my 2 kids. And so I actually, to be honest, had gotten to the point where I felt that maybe I just needed to walk away from Roundabout altogether, not because I wasn't passionate about what we were doing, but I think burnout is a real thing and I was very burnt out. So the board was fabulous and we made the decision that we'd hire a CEO. So we had someone come on board last year, Jeanette Dyer, who was outstanding. She did a great job. But at the end of last year, she decided that it's a hard slog working in the not-for-profit space, which she was, it was a new space for her. So she went on to something equally as exciting and moved on to something else. But it actually, the timing worked out really well for me personally because it meant that I'd had a bit of a break last year. And I decided, I think COVID also made people think a little bit, I know it made me personally think a little bit differently about what was important to me and, how I wanted to spend my time. And, I've loved my job in the public service here, but it made me reflect on the fact that, I've spent years and a lot of time and energy building Roundabout to where it is now. And it was a really good opportunity for me to actually to leave my other paid job and take this on as a paid role, and it has just been such a fabulous start to the year. So yes, I have had moments where I've thought, maybe Roundabout won't need me, but I think for now it does need me, and I think I will definitely, be here in this role for the foreseeable future. And it might get to a point where it sort of outgrows me because I know that I'm not a highly experienced CEO of a not-for-profit. Obviously, this is my only experience working in this role, but I think as the founder, I have this deep passion and energy and, big ideas that I'm happy to, find a way to solve. So I think the timing is really good for me and for Roundabout.
I think you're actually underplaying your capabilities. From what I can see so far, you're doing really well as a CEO in general, regardless of size. And let's talk about funding, because for you to be able to be in a paid role and to leave your previous job, you had to somehow bring in enough money to pay staff. So how did you do that? And where are you at now with funding? You did talk about grants already. So how much of grants what percentage of grants is your revenue?
Yeah, so the first couple of years of Roundabout's operations, our expenses were very minimal. So we did have one casual staff member that was partly funded through a grant, but otherwise our expenses were extremely low. But as we've grown over the years, and we'll always be primarily volunteer run, but we've just found that once you get to a certain size, it becomes more and more important to have those paid staff there just to hold things together, to keep things professional, smooth, safe. It really is vital. So wages are the bulk of our expenses now. So we don't have any ongoing funding, although there was an announcement made yesterday about the ACT government giving us some funding as part of their upcoming budget, which is fantastic and something we've been keeping our fingers crossed for a little while. So that's very exciting. But until now, we haven't had any ongoing funding. So the income that we have brought in has been through our own fundraising appeals. So we always and that can be something that's hard for people to come to terms with in the not-for-profit space. It's really hard to ask people for money. And if it's not, as someone who doesn't come from a fundraising background or from a charity background, that is something that I've had to change my thinking around. But I now really do feel very strongly about the fact that it is, we're doing vital work in our community, as are so many wonderful charities in our community, and funding is a challenge for all charities. So I think it's very appropriate that people, seek the support of their community and the wonderful people around them. So, fundraising efforts. We run the occasional event, although COVID's obviously made that difficult for a lot of people. We apply for a lot of grants, and I should have checked, but at the moment, I'd say maybe not quite a third of our funding probably comes from grants. So, well, maybe about a third. But grants are hard because it's a skill that you have to develop to write grants, and not a skill that everyone has. And it's very much dependent on who else is applying for the grant at the time. So, sometimes you feel you've done a great job and then you miss out. So it's unpredictable. And then we also have some, wonderful businesses in our community and individuals who support us with, large donations, which is wonderful as well. So, so we're working really hard. I'm working really hard now on trying to build a bit of a stable funding base, because until now we've been focused sort of, it's been each year we've had to start fresh and continue to raise the money again to get through the following year. So my focus is very much at the moment on trying to secure some multi-year funding so that it just takes a little bit of pressure off. And although fundraising will always be a huge part of what we do, it'll just mean that there's a bit of pressure removed, and we continue to just grow.
Look, I think sustainable fundraising is difficult, and depending on the government, it's not actually any easier, right? Because that can change with the policy of the day or the government of the day. Do you see any opportunities in commercial revenue?
So that's interesting, actually, and it's something we've sort of revisited every now and again. So in terms of, selling some of the goods that people give to us, we've talked about, opening an op shop type store. But I think what people really like about Roundabout is that they give stuff to us and they know that it will go to a family who needs things. So it's a model that we're really keen to stick to as much as we can. And I can see there could be commercial opportunities there. And some of the sort of sister orgs that I mentioned do have that model where they sell things. Okay. But I think, what stands us apart from op shop type stores, which is obviously another option for people to donate their pre-loved children's items, is that our goods are going to families who need them directly, and I think our supporters like that, and we really like that as well. So
it's so hard, isn't it? Like that conversation about being mission driven, but at the same time, you need to make it financially sustainable,
Definitely.
right? And so that balance is just so challenging. When you were talking earlier about the hard idea of asking for money, I think it also goes back to people sometimes thinking a charity shouldn't make any money at all, and that salaries should be all volunteer, or they shouldn't have any overhead. It's fundamental flaw in that idea, because the reality is that all research has shown that charities and not-for-profits deliver services cheaper than government or anybody else can provide, right?
That's right. And I think because charities do operate under this mentality of doing things in as lean a way as possible. So, we are very cautious about the money that we spend. But I do think it's a common thought, but it is very flawed because, and I also listened to a great podcast recently that was talking about how, we want to see charities growing. We want to see, charities being able to increase their impact, and they can't increase their impact unless they increase the amount of money that they're bringing in. Mm-hmm. And the way to do that is to fundraise and to, bring in more money and then have the money going out to do great things.
Yeah. Well, I actually said in another podcast where I like the fact that here in Australia we say not for profit, meaning it's not the mission. In America, they still say nonprofit. And I think it already tells you, oh, you can't make a profit.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, how are you going to – you can't survive year on year without some money in the balance sheet.
That's right.
How did you get all these skills? You're a public servant. Now you have employees. You have financial statements to deal with. You have grants to write. There's a lot of skill sets in there for someone who didn't come from that kind of a background. How did you learn all this stuff?
I think actually my public service roles have probably helped a lot in terms of, I guess, communication, people management, some of those types of things. And I think I have, so budgeting is actually not something that I haven't had experience doing that in my paid roles, but we have a fabulous treasurer on our board who has spent a lot of time with me helping to upskill me and make sure that I'm, competent in that space. So I think, again, it comes back to asking people for help if you don't know how to do something. So I think I'm just open to learning, and so some of it certainly has come from my paid roles, but some of it is about me sort of pushing myself, challenging myself, I really, this year in particular, I have, I constantly say to myself, you feel uncomfortable with this, but just give it a go. And, particularly in the fundraising space is a really good example of that, or having a conversation where you're asking someone to support you financially. I just take a deep breath and just challenge myself. So
obviously you've figured things out.
Somehow, yeah.
Well, with only 2 real FTEs, you obviously would outsource a lot of your back office. Do you have a lot of service providers providing you with things like accounting, IT?
Yeah. So it's mainly – so the main areas that we outsource is – so we have a bookkeeper who so for some time we did have a wonderful volunteer who did all of our bookkeeping as a volunteer. But as we grew and, wanted to professionalise and, she, went back to work and, needed her time back, we realised that it actually is – it's a very important thing to pay for. We outsource our bookkeeping, which is great. And we also have an accountant. In terms of sort of IT, we just muddle our way through. So where some of it is, calling on, a friend for help if we get stuck with something that, and that has been a bit of a shock for me actually coming from a public service department where you have an HR section and an IT section that you can call when you get stuck. So it really is about just solving the problems on your own, which we managed to do. But certainly in that financial management space, I think it's really important that it's done properly and by someone who knows what they're doing.
And what about payroll?
That's done by our bookkeeper as well.
Okay.
So, that's another thing that's been really great to have it, done by someone who knows what they're doing.
Well, it's not always the same person, though. I find payroll because if you're doing awards and other things, sometimes you need a specialist to help with that. And as you grow, you might need HR support that is beyond the financial piece.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the other thing that was sort of on our radar is looking at some support in the sort of communications space, which is something that we don't have a dedicated person doing any of that sort of stuff at the moment. But I think that's another thing that's really important, just to keep, branding on track and, your messages consistent and things like that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's – if you would have heard the last episode that just went out, you'd know that there's someone who does that specifically for not-for-profits. That Rodney Farrell from PN Digital, he was on the show and he was talking specifically about how they support not-for-profits. So potential opportunity there to collaborate.
Yes.
If you can't, if you need to outsource that piece of work, and always
fabulous.
Happy to share those contacts. Are you needing any support from our listeners right now? What can we do to support you?
Yeah, so I guess for those that are Canberra based, we're always extremely happy to take donations of secondhand children's items. Financial support is something that we are always extremely grateful for. But the other thing that I thought might be worth mentioning is that there are these other organisations in other parts of Australia that do what we do. So for those that are based in other parts of Australia and even internationally, I know there are charities that operate, under a very similar model in other countries. I think if you're a parent and you have, children's items, or if you are wanting to volunteer for a cause similar to ours, do some Googling, because there are some really fantastic organisations that exist around Australia and the world, very similar to us.
We'll make sure if we can, gather a couple of those website addresses and put them into the show notes. For you specifically in Canberra, are there any specific items that you're really short on right now?
Yeah, so for those of you that are in Canberra, you know how cold it is, and it's 9 degrees today, I think, so it's very, very cold. So winter clothing for older children in particular. So we do actually find we get a lot of baby clothes, which is fabulous, and we're always happy to take them. But for children aged between sizes 5 to 16, we really struggle to get enough clothing. And at the moment, it's winter coats we are just desperate for. So we'll very gladly take those. The other thing is double prams, something we're always short of. And otherwise, just winter linen. And then for people who might not have children but might want to, provide some goods, the sort of consumable items like nappies and wipes and toiletries for children and for adults are something that's easy to pop in your trolley when you're doing your supermarket shop, and we are always so grateful to have those things.
Okay. We'll make sure we put your address as well there so people can do some drop-off. Hannah, it's fantastic talking to you today. I think that some of the things that you've already put in place in such a short time, it's like I said, it's best practice for a small charity to be able to do it so lean and yet so efficiently. I would like to write a case study about this one, because I just feel like there's a lot of charities that can really learn from this conversation that we've had today, and I hope that they do take on board some of your learnings and the technology that you've already adopted, learning from others. You're obviously also very good at getting people to help you and taking their advice, and that's a great learning as well. But the work that you guys are doing as an organization is just brilliant, and helping so many families that need this, that they wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. So thank you for the work that you and your team
Tammy.
do.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Tammy again. When I'm not doing podcast, I'm helping not-for-profits with IT decisions. The question for this week's IT in Plain English segment is, what's the difference between a CIO and a CTO? I sometimes hear clients use these terms interchangeably when referring to the most senior IT person in their organization. And generally, this person reports directly to the CEO. Now, a CIO is a Chief Information Officer, and a CTO is a Chief Technology Officer. The main difference between these two roles is that the CIO usually focuses internally on supporting the rest of the organization, while the CTO is usually externally focused on building technology and related products to increase revenue. In reality, there are very few CIOs and even fewer CTOs in not-for-profits, mainly due to the cost of hiring these skills. That's why they bring in external consultants like me to help with strategic decisions whenever needed. So there you have it in plain English. If you have an IT question you want answered, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I just might answer it on this show. And if you've liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave me a review. To all of you executives with a cause, the world is definitely a better place because of you. Thank you for what you and your teams do every day.